I must disclose that I have only come across this information as I am involved in litigation with Menards Incorporated. I do have a personal interest in exposing these issues. I do not claim to be unbiased. The facts that I present, however, are publicly available and entirely verifiable. Steve Hilbert was the partner of John Menard. Mr. Hilbert's wife filed a lawsuit against Mr. Menard for sexual harassment, assault, battery, extortion, and other claims. The lawsuit alleged that Mr. Menard asked her for sexual favors in 2011, which she declined. John Menard then allegedly touched Miss Hilbert inappropriately several times. When she continued to refuse his unwanted advances, Mr. Menard threatened that there would be severe financial consequences. Miss Hilbert dismissed his initial advances as drunken nonsense, but he repeated his advances the next day. When she refused again, Mr. Menard then went on to retaliate against friends and family of the Hilberts. He fired his own partner, Steve Hilbert. He canceled contracts with Todd Hilbert, their son, and even canceled a business contract with Melania Trump, who was a friend of the Hilberts. But it doesn't stop there. Mr. Menard also fired another friend of Miss Hilbert, who he also allegedly sexually assaulted and who repeatedly rebuffed his advances. This friend was Lisa Trudeau, the wife of former Indianapolis Colts quarterback Jack Trudeau. Furthermore, John Menard was successfully sued for gender discrimination in the case of his female chief financial officer, who he underpaid by over $1 million. Menard began penalizing his managers if a store unionized. That's something that's every employee's legal right. He cut his managers' pay by a full 60% if a store decided to unionize. Mr. Menard was a major donor to the Koch brothers-led anti-union program. I personally believe unions have outlived much of their usefulness, but penalizing your managers for employee unionization is just wrong on every level. John Menard also decided to penalize management for such offenses as $10 for every 15 carts in the parking lot and $100 per minute for late store openings. Many Menards locations searched the lunch boxes and personal effects of their employees leaving the store. John Menard prohibits his managers from building or improving their homes, on the chance they could theoretically steal building supplies from him. He even would send private investigators to regular employees' homes who were engaging in small-scale home improvement projects to ensure they were not stealing from him. He was literally sending PIs to spy on his own employees at their own homes. A columnist for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune once described Menard's manner of handling an employee as, quote, something exhumed from the Bronze Age with all its primitive logic intact, end quote. This brings us to the despicable case of Eldon Helgett, a lumberyard manager for Menards located in Burnsville, Minnesota, who worked for the company for 13 years. Mr. Helgett had a daughter who became disabled. Not being able to find a home to accommodate his daughter's special needs, Mr. Helgett wished to build a new home that was handicapped accessible, so his wife did not have to carry their daughter throughout the house anymore. Larry Menard, Eldon's boss, said there was no exception to the rule that managers could not build houses. So Mr. Helgett was given the option that he could take a lower-level job and nearly 50% reduction in pay. Helgett felt he had no choice but to agree to this caveat for the sake of his daughter. The Helgetts hired a contractor who used materials from an entirely different company. However, when John Menard found out about the deal, even though it was approved by Menard's own brother, John Menard fired Helgett, and the company informed him that if he showed up on company property again, he would be arrested for trespassing. Menard said, "What's the use of having a rule if you don't enforce it?" When a local lumber yard heard this story and offered to hire Helgett, Menard invoked a non-compete clause that prohibited Helgett from working for any local competitor. He was told he could move 200 or so miles from the house he just built if he wanted to work in the same industry. And that's not the worst from the founder of the nation's third largest home improvement chain. There's the case of the North Dakota manager whose wife had premature triplets. The children required special medical attention at the University of Minnesota Medical Center. The manager flew back and forth to work, putting 30 to 40 hours in a week, on top of coping with an ailing wife and children. 2 of the 3 children died. John Menard fined this manager $2,000 because he failed to put in the full 55 required hours those 2 weeks while he cared for his wife and buried his children. I don't often use the word evil. John Menard's paranoia does not stop with his employees, friends, or managers. He does not even trust his own customers. Menards has worked out an arrangement with police to ignore false imprisonment by store loss prevention or management, while police compel warrantless searches under the guise of suspicion generated by nothing more than refusal to comply with Menards' unlawful and paranoid policies. This is where my personal story intersects with the stories told above, and I am not alone. I've come to find that they've been previously sued and warned by the court in cases such as Zahn versus Menard Incorporated that this was in fact a false imprisonment. But they continue this unlawful practice without fear with the full cooperation of local police. And we wrap things up with John Menard's unabashed poisoning of the environment and his kickbacks to local politicians. Menard has had more run-ins with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources than any other Wisconsin-based company, according to a Milwaukee Magazine article written by Mary DeVandekamp Knoll in 2007. Menards had 21 violations amounting to $1.7 million in fines. To illustrate the brazenness of Mr. Menard's disregard for environmental safety, in 1997, John Menard filled his own truck with plastic bags full of chromium and arsenic-laden wood ash. He took these bags to his home to dispose of in his household trash. However, generous contributions to the campaign of Scott Walker resulted in considerably less enforcement action, as well as $1.8 million in special tax credits from a corporation that Walker chairs. I guess you really can save big money at Menards, if you are willing to violate federal labor laws, treat your employees like criminals, imprison your customers, walk out on your contracts, pay off politicians, and poison the environment. Please hit a like and subscribe. Peace to everyone.